Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about the word factoring having to do with algebra expressions before we actually jump in and start factoring. In arithmetic, the word factor is very cut and dry. If I say to factor the number 6, I'm asking you to list me all the numbers, all the divisors, all the factors that would multiply to 6. And that would be 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. So the factors of 6 are 1, 2, 3, and 6. So there's 4 factors to the number 6. And that's the only way we factor in arithmetic, is when we talk about factoring a number, we're breaking it down into its multiplication tables. That is totally different in algebra. Our goal is to learn how to factor polynomial expressions. Well, unfortunately, there's not just one way to factor a polynomial expression. There are actually 5 rules of factoring that we have to learn in the upcoming modules on how to break down a polynomial expression into multiplication. So this is going to require a lot more work because it's not as cut and dry as arithmetic. The first thing I'm going to make a big stink about is, yes, you need to know the names of the 5 rules. If you don't know the names of the 5 rules, then you will not understand how to decide which rule to use. So if you see in your notes, there is a list of the 5 rules of factoring. And I always write them in this specific order because there's a method to my madness of how I want you to memorize them. So the rules are GCF, which is a 3rd grade word, which stands for greatest common factor, difference of perfect squares, trinomial, grouping, and sum and difference of perfect cubes. Now, the reason why I have the 5 rules listed in that specific order is because that's the approach you're going to take when you're given a polynomial expression. So remember, a polynomial expression is many monomials connected by adding and subtracting. And when I ask you to factor that expression, I'm really asking you to rewrite it as now multiplication. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through this checklist every time. The first rule up there is GCF, greatest common factor. So the first thing you're going to do is look at your polynomial expression and see if it has the GCF, and if you could do that rule, you would do it first. Now, if your polynomial expression only has 2 terms, which we know is called a binomial, then you would go to rule 2, which is called difference of perfect squares. So only if you have 2 terms can you use that rule. If your polynomial expression had 3 terms, what do we call that? That's called a trinomial expression. So if your polynomial expression had 3 terms, you would do the trinomial rule of factoring. If your polynomial expression has 4 terms, then we would use the grouping rule of factoring. So there's a reason why they're in that order. The first rule is GCF because we're going to see if we can do that with any polynomial, whether it has 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms, 5 terms. If it had 100 terms, we would look for the GCF first. But then if it had only 2 terms, a binomial, we would look at difference of perfect squares. If it had 3 terms, a trinomial, we would do the trinomial rule. And if it had 4 terms, we would do the grouping rule. Now, the last rule of factoring is called sum or difference of perfect cubes. Now, don't get nervous. That doesn't have 5 terms. That one's listed at last because that's the rule that's the least used in algebra. So that's why I have it last on the list, because it's the least one used. We don't ever come across that one very much, but I do need to show it to you. That rule, sum or difference of perfect cubes, sounds like rule 2, difference of perfect squares. So that rule will only have 2 terms also, a binomial. But it's on the ends of the list because we use it the least. So we're going to go through this checklist in the next couple of modules, showing you how you decide which rule and then how to work the rule by factoring. It is very important that you understand each of those titles, those names are important. They're telling you what you're looking for. You need to think of factoring like working with a jigsaw puzzle. Now, I'm sure all of you at one time have done a puzzle before. If the puzzle only has 10 or 20 pieces, it's no big deal. But think about having a jigsaw puzzle that has 1,000 pieces. How would you approach putting that jigsaw puzzle together? Well, most people would first take all the pieces and separate the inside pieces to the outside pieces. And we all know the outside edges have that straight side. But then to actually put the pieces together, it's like trial and error. You put a piece, see if it fits, and if it doesn't, you discard it. Pick another piece. Well, it's the same thing with factoring. When you're factoring a polynomial expression, it's kind of like trial and error. You're going to try a rule, and if it doesn't work, well, we're going to move on to the next rule. My job is to help you decide which rule to try first. So you're not trying all 5 rules all the time. There are patterns, way to know which rule to use with which expression. So a lot of this is memorizing patterns. The end result of this whole module is to rewrite the expression as multiplication. So it's important to understand, if we're rewriting our expression in terms of multiplication, what symbol means multiplication in math? That's right, parentheses. So when we factor a polynomial expression, every answer you give me will have parentheses because you're rewriting it as multiplication. Okay, let's get to the next video where we learn how to factor. See you then.